Even though I know it's happening, it still feels surreal to say, today the world gets a brand new Beatles song. Today on the podcast, you'll hear the story of how it all came together, and we'll talk about this Beatles renaissance, reintroducing one of the greatest bands of all time to a brand new generation. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Listen, I'm not going to get in your way, okay? This is a big deal, a brand new Beatles song. There's a fascinating story behind the song and the technology that helped make it happen. And we're going to talk about all of that in just a second. But first, the song is called Now and Then. It just came out. I want you to hear a bit of it for the first time. Honestly, incredible to hear John Lennon's voice right there. That's Now and Then, the new song from the Beatles. We would love to play you the whole thing right now, but because of a lot of complicated music rights stuff, this is all we're allowed to put on this podcast. But you can stream the rest of the song wherever you get your music. But look, there's a lot to get into with the song. Now and Then is being billed as the last Beatles song. I think most folks know the story, right? You know the story that the Beatles broke up back in 1970, then John Lennon died in 1980, and we lost George Harrison in 2001. Now we only have two members of the band remaining, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. Well, incredibly, thanks to the magic of AI, Paul and Ringo were able to transform an old John Lennon demo into a brand new Beatles song. All four play on the song, which makes it a true Beatles song. And here to tell us the story behind it are two of my favorite Fab Fourologists, Paul Myers and Maura Johnston. Paul, Maura, welcome to the show. Hello.
Hi.
Listen, I'm excited to talk about this. It feels a little bit overwhelming, I think, to this is a new Beatles song that we haven't heard before. Paul, listen, you're both hearing the song for the first time this morning, but you were already familiar with the original demo track that John Lennon did. What do you think of what Paul and Ringo did to it?
Well, it's miraculous what they did to it, and it's something that could only be done this year or maybe last year. And it has a lot to do with Peter Jackson being able to his team came up with the technology with the machine-assisted learning, which is called MAL, which is very ironic for Beatle fans because Mal Evans was the Beatles' trusting road crew manager back in the Get Back film. You see him all the time. Yeah. So suddenly, and also it sounds a lot like HAL 9000. So it's kind of an amazing thing that thanks to Mal doing the heavy lifting, once again, we have a new Beatles track. I think it's amazing what they did in terms of adding the strings and surprisingly minimal. It's not minimal, but it's surprisingly they didn't go way over the top in a way that maybe Jeff Lynne might have. Jeff Lynne this time is not involved in the final mix, so it's kind of neat.
Maura, something that sticks out to me in that song is that right at the beginning you hear Paul kind of count us in, you know?
Yeah.
And but he's not counting, he's counting John in. And that feels like a bit of a surreal moment. That's something that sticks out to me. It's like, what? I'm able to hear Paul count John in to a brand new Beatles song. What sticks out for you about the song?
The wistfulness of it, which I think is appropriate given the occasion, you know, the refrain, now and then I miss you, now and then I want you to return to me. Yeah. It has this bittersweetness about it, you know, and it kind of speaks to the knowledge that a chapter is closing or being closed. I mean, it sounds great. And also, you know, it's always just a treat to hear Paul McCartney's bass line kind of peeking out of the mix as well. His bass lines are just so creative and great.
We should say that the release of Now and Then was also accompanied by this short film about the song's creation. I want you to have a listen to this.
When we lost John, we knew that it was really over.
I was talking to Yoko, and she said, I think I've got a tape of John.
Paul called me up and said he'd like to work on Now and Then. He put the bass on, I put the drums on.
It's the last song that my dad and Paul and George and Ringo will get to make together.
How lucky was I to have those men in my life?
Paul, this song has had this long journey to the finish line. You alluded to some of it earlier, but can you just give us the lowdown on this song's history, why it's taken all the way to 2023 to surface?
Well, way back in the 90s, when they were doing the anthology, that tape that George was alluding to in that clip, that cassette was, and it's, I've read various reports that it said "For Paul" on it, which also makes the lyrics of Now and Then seem even more poignant.
Yeah.
Because the songs on it were like Free as a Bird, Real Love, and this one, Now and Then. And so that cassette, they listened to those, and if you know the Beatles anthology, like people like me do, and you realize that they actually, they worked up Free as a Bird and they worked up Real Love, and both of those became very popular hits. And they divided some Beatles fans, but the thing about the third song was there was a piano and voice, and it was done in the Dakota, and which is John's apartment in New York, John and Yoko's apartment, and it had the piano so loud on the track, and they mentioned this in the documentary as well, that they really couldn't in the 90s extract a clean lead vocal, and they did some work like that on Free as a Bird, and it sounds, to be honest, they should probably go back and have a look at that one too now. But yes. This time they could do it, and you hear that in that documentary, which I highly recommend. There's a moment where they just play the clean John Lennon, cleaned up version of his voice, and it is stunning. I don't think a lot of hardcore Beatle fans wept when they heard that, because it's just like a seance, really, a digital seance.
Yeah, I think like that's really the thing that I wanted to get at, is like the song sounds beautiful, but in that moment for me, in the film Maura, was like the most jarring moment. Like you see, they sort of visually represent extracting John's voice from the piano and separating it, and then just playing John's voice on its own, and you get chills. You sort of get full body chills of like, there he is. But they found it. They were able to sort of turn it up and make it really clear. What was the most illuminating aspect of the short film for you?
I really loved how it cut back and forth between like the past, the more recent past in the 90s, as Paul mentioned, and the present, because I felt like it really illuminated just how alive the Beatles legacy is.
Yeah.
Nearly 6 decades after Beatlemania landed here on, in North America. And I mean, even in the wake of the Get Back documentary and its, exhaustive chronicle of the creation that they did, still like watching them create in any form is still thrilling. And especially like with this new technology, which, they mentioned that John would have probably appreciated this. And I think that is true in as much as just using the expansion of what the studio can do.
Paul, you mentioned earlier, this is not the first time that they've done this. They did this with a couple of songs back in 1995. Paul, George, and Ringo got together and they reconvened for this. Paul, I have this question, but I feel like I have my answer in your reaction to it. Because my question is, Free as a Bird comes out in 1995. It becomes the first new song released under the Beatles name after the 1970 breakup. And, my question was going to be like, do these revived Beatles songs feel like official entries into the Beatles canon? But both you and Maura did this sort of dance immediately the moment that Free as a Bird came on. So clearly that tells me that, like, you know what, this was like a welcome addition to the Beatles catalog.
More. I don't want to.
That was to you. That was to you, Paul. Sorry.
Oh, to me. Okay. Yeah. So, well, I would say that one of the things that makes it Beatle-y is, I gotta say, and there's been Paul bashing over the years. I gotta say, I don't know anyone who curates his legacy better. And you could be cynical. There is a skeptical take that things come out just every holiday season. There's a brand new Beatle product to buy.
Yes, but there is. Yeah.
I gotta say. They know their audience, and they're giving the people what they want. I mean, in an era of Taylor's versions, I'm happy to hear McCartney's versions. I like what's going on with the Beatles legacy. I have the Revolver box set back here. Yeah. And Peter Jackson is another secret weapon. He understands the people he's curating, the making of the Get Back film, but he also plays a big part in how this record got together because it was his team.
Right.
I don't, the joke I always make is he's making Lord of the Ringos, because it's sort of, he knows two things really well, right? Like
Lord of the Rings and the Beatles.
So anyway, I think Free as a Bird also has this thing of instant nostalgia because it's from the 90s, but it feels like, oh, that was 30 years ago. So we're okay. It's still nostalgia. So, but I like what Maura said too about the fact that Beatle film cuts it's stunning how they cut from Ringo in the last year to Ringo today, for Ringo in 67. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think Maura, you described it as exhaustive. I would also add the word exhausting. Get Back as a documentary in terms of watching. It is an overwhelming amount of footage to watch, and there's not necessarily a lot of narrative structure so much as you just get to be plunged deeply into the world of the Beatles as they're hanging out, as they're making music, and even as they have this sort of looming deadline. They are, you get to see them be a family. It's so lovely to sort of get to watch that. But how do you feel about the way that they've managed their legacy over the years, the thing that Paul just mentioned?
I think Paul is really spot on about, the curation being very thoughtful and obviously meeting a demand, because there is such a huge demand for just getting into this band so many years after they broke up, and they're always minting new fans. The next generation families listen to the Beatles together in whatever contexts.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, I'm curious about how this song brings them further into the streaming era, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of curiosity about this song. And so how will that translate into searching for the song?
Paul, in that sense, is there such a thing as too much new Beatles product? Is that even possible?
I think they've been pretty good about, this stuff, this one, as Maura says, it sort of sounds like it's aiming at getting back on the charts.
Right.
But I think the, in terms of box sales and stuff like that, I think that, it's pretty sporadic and it's pretty clockworky, and is, it costs money to buy those box sets.
Right.
So I don't know, even the older archivists like myself probably have to think about other things like rent.
Right.
But I know a lot of people who'd be happy to do it. And some people really literally have day jobs just to support their record habits. So that's what happens.
It's probably a very expensive hobby, being a big fan of the Beatles. More obviously, pop radio looks very different now than it did in the Beatles' sort of 1960s heyday. There really aren't a lot of top pop artists today taking direct musical cues from the Beatles. Where do you see the Beatles' influence manifesting itself right now?
Well, I always, Paul bringing up Taylor's version earlier, made me think that if the Beatles were to put out a brand new album of material, if there was a McCartney's version, so to speak, I feel like it would do that thing that so many albums by big artists have done, which is just flood the Hot 100 with singles. Because, they had so many records for number of singles on the charts at the same time, and longevity and number of number ones that have been kind of, chipped away at because of the methodologies that the charts have taken over time, and this, especially in the States.
Right.
You have the Taylor Swift with all the songs in the top 10. And I feel like, that's the kind of maximalist audience approach that the Beatles had. But there's also, Harry Styles, I feel like, is also kind of walking that teen idol to adult pop star path.
Yeah.
Right. And then I do think that sonically, even though there might not be direct influences, definitely the care and the headphone readiness, so to speak, of productions, even on records like Olivia Rodrigo's Sour and Guts, which Dan Nigro just does such a great job making those records dense, So I think that there are, even if it's not maybe a direct rock influence, there are definitely ways that you can hear strands of the Beatles' influence over time.
Paul, last word to you on this. Where do you see the Beatles' influence in 2023?
I think that they are still, as Maura was alluding to, they're still minting new fans every time they get into the zeitgeist. And I think that you probably have hip hop and pop artists who feel like they have to study the Beatles and they have to know they have to know them the way maybe a classical student would have to study Stravinsky or Gershwin even. And I think that the structural elements of the way, what they call the verse A, verse B, verse C, those things are true no matter what the beats are.
Right.
And I think that you would still be able to break down, and it's funny because this was mixed by the same guy who's worked with people like Radiohead and Ed Sheeran, Spike Trent. And it's not like, we're all going back and forth. And Nigel Godrich worked with Paul McCartney, so it's not like those things aren't in everyone's head anyway. So right. I think that is an enduring influence. And then there's more overt ones like your post Oasis side of the music world, which has waned and whatever over time. But I think the structural influence is very prevalent and perennial.
Well, Paul, Maura, we're going to have to leave it there, but I appreciate you guys being here to react to a song that you're just hearing for the first time. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank
My pleasure.
You.
Thanks, guys. Paul Myers is a writer based in San Francisco and host of the Record Store Day podcast. Maura Johnston is a music journalist based in Boston. If you missed us playing Now and Then at the top of the show, you can listen to it right now wherever you stream your music. And of course, you can catch this 12-minute documentary about how the song came together on CBC's Gem. Hey, listen, before I go, can I talk to you about something for a minute? Okay, I saw this news story the other day. Apple TV Plus, who are one of the producers of Killers of the Flower Moon, that's the new Martin Scorsese movie, they served legal notices to some small theaters because those theaters are adding an intermission to this movie, even though it doesn't actually have one. Listen, Apple's position is that this is a violation of the agreement that theaters made in order to run the movie. And for context, yes, I get it. The movie is long, okay? It's super long. It is probably the longest movie I've seen in a theater. It is 3 hours and 26 minutes long. But look, it gives me no pleasure to side with Apple here, okay? They're right to ask theaters to stop adding intermissions. I get it. The movie's long, but it's also a movie. It's a very specific medium. And the people who work in film are actually making specific demands on you, right? Like Killers of the Flower Moon is long because it's supposed to overwhelm you. You don't get a break from the brutality and the intensity, and that's the point. The movie builds, adding intermission to me takes away from that build. The movie theaters have said, we're adding this intermission because people keep asking us for a bathroom break. Look, if you need to go to the bathroom during a long movie, you should do that. You're an adult. But don't force the rest of us to change our experience of the movie that we are watching. That's where I kind of fall down on this. If Scorsese wanted to make a work that has breaks and pauses, I think it would have been really easy for him to make Killers of the Flower Moon a TV show. This story is not episodic. It is one thing. I don't think it's right for theaters to be changing that. But hey, listen, I'm open to, course correcting on this. If you feel really strongly otherwise, I'd love to hear from you. I'm at Elamin on Instagram, Elamin on Instagram. Let's talk about it, okay? That is it for the podcast today. But listen, tomorrow we have a treat for you. We're going to be talking about the Hassan Minhaj story. And with us will be Ali Hassan, who you know and love, but also Roy Wood Jr. himself, who's from The Daily Show, one of the correspondents of The Daily Show. And we're going to be talking about all the nuances of the Hassan Minhaj story. I'm really looking forward to that. In the meantime, you can listen to any episode of Commotion anytime you like, wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. I'm going to be here tomorrow. I sure hope to see you then.